Thank you for staying with us this hour here on One American News. I'm Stephanie Myers. Senator Rand Paul reintroduced the Senate version of the National Right to Work Act, while Representative Joe Wilson reintroduced companion legislation in the House. The act aims to protect every private sector worker from being forced to pay union dues. Here to talk about this further is the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, Mark Mix. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for the opportunity. Last week was a big week for us and lots to talk about.
Exactly. So first, I want to ask, you had a booth set up at CPAC where you attended. What were you and the organization able to accomplish there?
Well, we just try to make sure that the folks that come to CPAC, the conservatives and the grassroots activists from around the country, know that we're here and help them understand our policy, which is real simple. And then to recruit folks to be on our team and to help with our grassroots mobilization and contacting politicians. CPAC is a good place where everyone gets together, and there's lots of media there, lots of celebrities, if you will, lots of politicians, and lots of people that can make a difference in America if they get involved. And we want them involved in this issue.
And the National Right to Work Act is highlighting the dangers of the so-called PRO Act. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, Stephanie, the National Right to Work Act is really simple. It's a one-page bill. It doesn't add a single word to federal law. It simply goes into the National Labor Relations Act, which was passed way back in 1935, and it takes out the compulsion and the force that was written into the legislation by Franklin Roosevelt and the Congress at that time. We go in and we say that the bias of unionism should be voluntary unionism, not compulsory unionism. Since that time, basically the federal law has decided that union officials can have workers fired if they don't tender dues or fees to the union in order to work. We disagree. The American public disagrees. But unfortunately, being right doesn't mean you win in a public policy debate. We have to organize and mobilize. And so Congressman Joe Wilson from South Carolina, Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, introduced a bill, these bills, one in the House, one in the Senate, that would simply go in and amend the National Labor Relations Act and make the federal bias in favor of voluntary unionism. In the states, 27 states have used the privilege that's been granted by the federal government to pass right to work laws. But the PRO Act, Stephanie, you mentioned the PRO Act that was introduced the day after our bill, would repeal all 27 right to work laws by basically saying the federal law says that you have to pay union dues or fees in order to work. We're opposed to that, obviously.
Absolutely. So President Biden just nominated Julie Su to be the next labor secretary. Of course, she'll have to be confirmed by the Senate. But what sort of questioning are you and the organization hoping lawmakers will ask of her and her background?
Yeah, well, I hope they'll look at her record out in California when she was working for Governor Gavin Newsom and some of the things that happened in the employment law out there. I mean, it's been a radical change. The idea of this so-called Assembly Bill 5, which basically says there can no longer be independent contractors in the state of California, and basically the damage it did to the gig economy and to so many folks that didn't think that, they wanted to be employees, they wanted to be independent contractors, work on their own hours, work on their own projects, and all of a sudden they were made employees because you can't unionize independent contractors, but you can unionize employees. She's bringing that mindset back to Washington, D.C. and the Department of Labor if she's confirmed. I mean, when she was confirmed as assistant secretary, she got 47 votes against her. I hope that the Senate will look at her record in California and look at what she's got in mind for the Department of Labor and say that this is not the type of policy. Bringing California policy to the United States has never been good for the United States.
Already, we've heard a number of Republican lawmakers coming out against her nomination, one of those being Bill Cassidy, who says he finds Sue's nomination worrisome for her support of what he calls anti-worker regulations that would eliminate many gig positions, as you just talked about. Speaking of dangerous proposals, though, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer is pushing forward to repeal the state's right to work law. This would make Michigan the first state to repeal a right to work law in 60 years. What's the organization doing to prevent this from happening?
Well, Stephanie, we're doing everything we can to prevent it from happening. We have folks on the ground up there. We're mobilizing literally the 170,000 identified right-to-work supporters that we know in Michigan, asking them to contact their legislators. But, Stephanie, the story here is just one that you have to shake your head at. On the campaign trail, Gretchen Whitmer and the legislature never talked about repeal of right to work. The moment they knew they'd taken the trifecta control of the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, the first and top issue for them was the repeal of the right to work law, forcing Michigan workers to pay union dues or fees opportunities in order to work. The story in Michigan couldn't be better. People are surprised that Michigan's a right-to-work state, but when you look at the data after the last 10 years that has been in place, you shouldn't be surprised because freedom works. 10 years prior to the passage of right-to-work, Michigan had what they called the lost decade. They were losing manufacturing jobs. They were losing private sector jobs. People were moving out, and the basically emigration from the state was dramatic. Over the last 10 years, Michigan has been one of the leaders in manufacturing new job growth in the country. I think it was like 149,000 new union members since the law passed. But what they want is they want those compulsory dues, because those compulsory dues turn into political funding, and that's what it's all about for many of these politicians. Not about freedom, not about anything else, but compulsion, force, and political money. We're going to stop them in Michigan, but we need everyone to kind of all hands on deck to fight them.
Absolutely. So speaking of all hands on deck, where can our viewers go to learn more about you and your work in the organization?
Yeah, Stephanie, they can find us on the internet at NRTWC.org. That's the committee's website where they can track all the legislation that we're working on and following in the 50 states and here in Washington, D.C., NRTWC.org. If they have questions about their legal rights in the workplace, they can go to NRTW.org. That's the foundation. They can talk to an attorney for free about their rights in the American workplace.
Again, President of the National Right to Work Committee, Mark Mix, thank you so much again for your time.
Stephanie, appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.